Today I am making the national dessert of Egypt, a bread pudding called omali, a dessert with an interesting story of deceit, murder, and the rise and fall of Egypt's only female sultan. So thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring this video as I make omali, this time on Tasting History. So this dish, omali, is said to have received its name in the 13th century, but bread puddings, very much like the modern version, have been in cookbooks from Egypt and the region going back at least to the 10th century, like in the Kitab al-Tabikh, or Book of Cooking by Ibn Shajar al-Durr, which says, take semolina or white bread and soak it in milk until saturated. Then take half a pound of sugar, or as much as is needed for the amount of bread, crush it and mix it with the bread. Then take a clean and shallow pot, add the soaked bread, milk, and sugar, return the pot to slow-burning coals. When the filling is cooked and set, remove the pot from the fire, turn it out onto a wide bowl, and serve, God willing. Other versions from the medieval period include some flavors that you will find in the modern version, like cinnamon and almonds and pistachio and even rosewater. But then there are also some ingredients that you don't really find today in this dish, like camphor and chicken. Now I am going to steer clear of the chicken, but I will use some of the other ingredients that I found in some of the medieval recipes. I'm also going to use the bread that was used at the time. Today it's very often made with croissants, which I'm sure is delicious. But back then they used a flat bread that was unleavened called rukak. And to make that, all you do is mix a half teaspoon of salt into 1 pound or 450 grams of flour, and then add 200 milliliters or a little over 3/4 of a cup of water and mix it all into a dough. Once the dough comes together, knead it on the counter for about 15 minutes or until it starts to become smooth, and then wrap it in some plastic wrap and set it aside for an hour to allow the gluten to relax. It'll also give you plenty of time to relax because kneading that dough, that really takes it out of you. Once you and the dough are nice and relaxed though, divide the dough into 8 pieces, then form each into a ball and begin to roll it out. Stretch and roll until it becomes as thin as you can possibly make it. Then set the dough on a pan and put it in the oven at 475 degrees Fahrenheit, 245 Celsius for 5 minutes. Now you can bake this for like 2 minutes and it will be done, but it'll be nice and soft and you can use that for like a wrap or something. But we want to have crispy bread. So you want to wait until it puffs up and begins to get some color on it, then take it out, and if it's nice and crisp, you know it's ready. This bread is still made in Egypt today, though I feel like usually it's used for a stuffed meat pie that they have, but it's used the same way that you would use like phyllo dough or puff pastry. And if you don't want to make it, you can actually just use some phyllo dough or puff pastry. It's going to end up being very similar, especially because after you've done all of the work of making it, you're just going to crumble it up into a baking dish. So sad. Like I said, the modern version just uses croissants, and so you can just like dry some croissants and break those up. That'll work too, but if you are doing that, then skip this next part because croissants have a lot of butter in them, whereas most of the old historic recipes say to melt beef tallow or butter and put that over the bread. I opted for butter. I used a half cup or 120 milliliters. Along with the melted butter, you can top this with an assortment of different nuts or dried fruits. Many of the old recipes have just all sorts of variations. I am using 3/4 of a cup of almonds, 3/4 of a cup of pistachios, and 1 cup of sultanas. Sultana is actually the word for a female sultan, or more often the person who is married to the sultan, so it's pretty fitting for this dish. Also, the nuts are going to be best if you toast them for a little while in a dry pan and then break them up before scattering them across the top and then add that layer of sultanas. Now when it comes to the milk that you use, most of the modern recipes use condensed milk, but they didn't have condensed milk in 13th century Egypt. So I looked towards some of the older recipes and they would use things like sour milk, some used yogurt, and then some just used basic milk and cream. So I am using 1 quart or 1 liter of whole milk plus 2 cups of cream to help thicken it. To that, whisk in 3/4 of a cup or 150 grams of sugar, and then set the pot on the stove and let it heat up. Once it starts to simmer, remove it from the heat and let it cool for about 5 minutes. And this is where you can add in all of the different flavors that you want to. Some of the old recipes used musk or poppy seeds or camphor, lots and lots of different things. I opted for 3/4 of a teaspoon of cinnamon, 3/4 of a teaspoon of cardamom, and 1 teaspoon of rosewater. whisk those into the warm milk, and then gently pour the milk over the bread and nuts. Make sure all of the bread gets nice and soaked, and you can push some of the nuts down and the sultanas down as you do this. Then set the dish in the oven at 400 degrees Fahrenheit, 205 Celsius, and let it bake for about 25 minutes or until the top gets nice and brown and the milk starts to bubble. So I had not heard of this dish until about a month ago when a viewer emailed me telling me a little bit about this dish. And on that same exact day, I went to go see a show, and at intermission, somebody came up to me and was like, "Hey, you should make amali." And then he proceeded to tell me the story about this dish. It's just kind of weird how that happens. Never heard of it, twice in one day. Anyway, the story was filled with intrigue and deceit and murder and was amazing and just the kind of thing I like to talk about here on Tasting History. So now I am going to tell you the story of amali. The year is 1239, and a young girl named Shajar al-Durr has found herself enslaved. And just like so many enslaved people at the time, at least women, she was to be sold as a concubine. And the man who bought her was the Prince of Egypt, Al-Salih Ayyub. Well, what happens next? Prince buys concubine, prince becomes sultan, sultan falls in love with concubine, sultan frees concubine, sultan and concubine get married. It's a tale as old as time. Well, while this twisted little love story is playing out in Egypt, further to the north, in France, King Louis IX is fuming. He has just learned that the Crusader kingdom of Jerusalem has been captured and is now in the hands of that same concubine-marrying sultan. So, he decides to start a crusade because, it's the Middle Ages and that's what you do. This is going to be the 7th crusade, and just like so many movie franchises, once the 7th one comes along, people start to lose interest. They're getting distracted by things like Holy Wars in Italy and the new Mongol franchise, which is coming in and invading Hungary. So people just weren't really into going on crusade at the time, so Louis decides, fine, I'll do it by myself. So he gathers his almost entirely French army and heads not to Jerusalem, but straight for Egypt. Well, that is a surprise, especially to the Egyptian Sultan, who happens to be in Syria at the moment fighting someone else. So he hears that Egypt is being invaded, and so he heads back, he gathers all of his generals, say, hey, we need to get an army, we're gonna set up camp here at Mansoura, and then he dies. He just dies. He had an abscess on his leg, they amputate it, and a few days later at night, he's dead. And the only person who was with him when it happened was his wife, Shajar al-Durr. The woman had to think on her feet. Now, the Sultan did have a son from a previous relationship, a man named Turan Sha, but unfortunately they did not get along well together, the Sultan and his son, and so he had never officially made him his heir. Plus, he had sent him to live way, way far away in what is now modern-day Turkey, so even if he had been the heir, he wasn't around to help. And by now, the French army had taken control of many of the port cities on the Nile Delta and was moving in to Egypt. And if people find out that the Sultan is dead, it's going to be absolute chaos. The generals are going to start fighting for power and the government is going to collapse. So what is Shajar to do? Well, have you seen Weekend at Bernie's? Because basically, that was her plan. She just pretended like he hadn't died. She told a few people who she really trusted what was going on, but most people were none the wiser, and she maybe forged his signature on a stack of documents, so whenever he was going to give an order, she would write it down and hand it off to a general or whoever. So she was kind of in charge. Now, one of the things that she did do was send somebody to go get that estranged son and bring him back, which he finally did. But as he was coming back, people started to figure out that something was afoot. Maybe the Sultan was, dead or something. And so Shajar finally comes out and is like, yeah, he died last night. It just happened. He hasn't been dead for weeks. It just happened. Not long after this, Turan Sha, the son, finally arrives in Egypt, and he, according to the sources, gathers an army of 3,000 farmers and fights the Crusader army of 15,000 strong and defeats them, capturing the entire force, including King Louis himself. End of 7th Crusade, roll credits. Everything's great now, Egypt is happy, they got their new sultan, except that it turns out the new sultan is a belligerent psychopath who is bent on killing all the people that his father brought into power. Now, this is, of course, coming from later sources who didn't like him, so who knows exactly what the truth is, but it does seem that he wanted to get rid of the group of people called the Mamluks. These were people who had started out as enslaved mercenaries, but had come to kind of run the place. He wanted to get rid of them and put all of his friends in power. His big mistake, though, seems to be that he also wanted to get rid of Shajar. But Shajar was like, I don't think so. I did not come all this way just to have it ruined by some snot-nosed little brat, even if he is my stepson. So she plotted with the generals to kill him, which they did. They hacked Turan Sha to death in the Nile River. Also, I love how medieval art makes everyone dress as if they are in Europe. Like, this is Turan Sha of Egypt, who is basically just a tan version of the French King Louis. Anyway, with Turan Sha out of the way, the Mamluks decide that they are going to make Shajar al-Durr sultan in her own right. Now, this is kind of a big deal. This is 13th century Egypt, and they have just made a woman in charge of absolutely everything. Kind of a big deal, and I feel like more people should know about this, especially because she did a really good job. Within days of taking the throne, she negotiated the ransom of King Louis and the French army for an enormous sum of money and got them to retreat from the port cities that they'd taken in the Nile Delta. Well, everybody should be happy, right? Not exactly, because there is a group in Syria called the Ayyubids who were kind of in charge of Egypt for the last 100 years. Her husband was one of them, and so they're like, wait, you put her on the throne? That's not cool. And so they start revolting. But even worse, the Caliph of Baghdad, who was the de facto religious leader of the caliphate, says, no, I don't think a woman should be in charge. So even though it was absolutely not fair, Shajar decides, fine, I will marry one of my top generals, a man named Az-ul-Din Aybak. Well, Aybak already has a son and a wife, and Shajar says, okay, that's fine, as long as they stay away. Which they did. For a while, we'll get back to them. But at first, things go all right. Aybak is basically in charge of the militaries, and Shajar is in charge of running everything else in Egypt. Hunky-dory, until finally Aybak is like, you know what? I should be in charge of everything. And so they had some spats and things started to fall apart. In addition, some military issues have arisen up in Syria, most of which Aybak actually caused. But Aybak needed some help dealing with it, so he needed an ally in the region. And that ally would be the Emir of Mosul. And to cement this relationship, Aybak says, okay, I'll marry your daughter, even though he's already married to Shajar, but whatever. Except that when Shajar finds this out, she's like, I don't think so. I did not come all this way to have some hussy from Mosul come in and take my power. So she decides, how about I deal with this in the same way that I dealt with the last sultan who made me mad? So one night, while Aybak is taking a bath, she has her servants go in and stab him to death. And the next morning, she goes out and tells everyone, oh no, my husband of 7 years, who was in perfect health, died last night. But they weren't buying it this time. Well, those who were loyal to the Sultan Aybak decide to torture the servants into confessing the murder, and so they arrest Shajar and lock her up in a tower. And at this same time, Aybak's former wife, the first wife, and son, who had been kind of cast off, came back. The son, who was 15 now, was named Al-Mansur Ali, and he became the new sultan. And his mother, who was still kind of peeved that she had been cast off in the first place, decided that Shajar was maybe too dangerous to keep around, so she had her servants go up into the tower one night, beat her to death with their shoes, and then throw her off the tower. And that was the end of the one and only female sultan in Egyptian history. Really, really quite sad, especially because she was pretty awesome. But after this heinous act, the mother of Ali, the new sultan, decided that they would celebrate with a dessert. and the dessert was a bread pudding, and so everyone called it Ali's mother, because that's who was having it made for the celebration. Ali's mother in Arabic is Ali. So that is where the name of this dish supposedly comes from. And now it's time for me to try my own Ali. So once the milk is boiling and the top is browned, take the Ali out of the oven and serve. And here we are. Ali, the national dessert of Egypt. It smells so good. Today, this is usually served with like a really thick cream that's almost like whipped cream on top, but I am not doing that. So I'm just eating alone, trying to get everything tried on. Here we go. The flavors are so good. It's sweet, but not overly sweet. You get a lot of sweetness from like the sultanas and everything. Flavor is great. The texture is odd because that bread is basically just flour and water. They're almost like noodles. It's kind of like a noodle dessert, which is a thing. But I think that if you use the modern day croissants, it's gonna have a much better texture. This isn't bad, it's just different, and I think that just croissants would be better. But the flavors are great. So especially if you are not making the bread yourself, it's actually a really easy dish to make. It doesn't take that much work. And I will put the recipe for this, as always, on the Tasting History website, tastinghistory.com, which I have made with some help from today's sponsor, Squarespace. Squarespace makes building a website so easy with their dynamic tools like their drag and drop technology for both desktop and mobile. And they have lots of different templates, which is great if you don't know a lot about building a website, like I didn't, because you have something to start off with. So you can take the template and then you can change it however you want, but it's better than just looking at a blank page. They also have lots of cool tools like email campaigns that help you send out emails to keep customers, or viewers in my case, with my newsletter, keep them up to date on things. So if you are looking to start a new website, then go to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/tastinghistory for 10% off of your first purchase of a website or domain. And I will see you next time on Tasting History.